Hey guys, I'm Icevena. Today we're going to be learning how to make Rave Techno by looking at a track of mine called Isolation Day 16. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. So this is the project file for my new single, Isolation Day 16. Let's have a listen to the first drop. So the thing with techno is it's quite repetitive. So this is the pads, and pretty much it's playing the same chords throughout the whole thing, except for here where it goes up an octave. And let's have a listen to those and I'll tell you what the chords are. So that is a very short loop. It's only 4 bars. It repeats throughout the whole thing, and it's C minor for 2 bars, and then E major, and then B flat major. And the bass line follows the chords pretty much exactly the same rhythm, the same note, the bass note of the chord. So that would be C, D sharp or E flat in this case, and then down to the B flat or A sharp. So I like to think in terms of flats, but Ableton doesn't. Ableton thinks in terms of sharps, but just so you're aware, D sharp is the same as an E flat, A sharp is the same as a B flat, pretty much. I've got some sidechain here, sending to the sends only. So this is just like a dummy kick, which I'm using to sidechain, I think, the pads. I'm using a sidechain compression on the pads so that it has a nice pulsing effect. I'm also using getting some crunch there from the drum bus on the pads. So you can use drum bus on different channels apart from drums. You think drum bus means only drums, but no, you can use it on anything you like. Anything you want to try and beef up a bit, add some distortion, it's very good for that. And you can also fiddle with the dry and wet, so it's not as intense. So you can take it down to your taste, so you don't have it too beefy, but you get some more beef without having too much beef. I've also got a auto filter, which is automating throughout the track, and that's another way to add interest, because I did say that it's very repetitive, which is the point, but you do want to keep it interesting, and filtering is a really good way to do that. So we start off the track with the filter on the pad, and you can hear it's very soft and subtle, but then we open it up and you can see here the filter's moving on the knob, and there it's opened up and it's nice and airy. And we also do the opposite, coming from the bottom and taking out the low frequencies with the high pass filter. So you've got these different filter options down here, and basically the most common ones you'll be using is the low pass filter and the high pass filter, and they're handy when you're moving to and from breakdowns and drops. So that's why I think here, just before the drop here, I pull it up. So you're taking out all those low frequencies. And yeah, it actually disappears because there's nothing, it goes all the way up, which is quite fun to be fiddling around with the auto filters doing that. And the other thing I thought I'd show you is the breakdown here. So obviously in techno, the kick drum is very important, but it's also important to have some space where there is no kick drum, because that's where your breakdown occurs, and that's where you're building up tension to the next drop. And we can hear that in the transition here. So there is the kick drum again, This time, instead of the 4 to the floor beat that we had at the start, like this on every beat, 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, is what we call a 4 to the floor kick drum pattern. This drop, I decided to change up the pattern, and we've got these extra 8th notes in here, or quavers, between the 2nd and the 3rd beat, and then in the next bar, I put it between the 1st and the 2nd. So a good thing to do when you're making loops for techno, what I got into when I was first starting, it was a trap that I fell into where I'd make 1 bar loop. So for example, instead of this 2 bar loop, I would do something like this. And so it would loop over and over and over. But when you have something like a 2 bar loop or a 4 bar loop, it has more variety because I have this extra note on a different beat instead of this all the time. And it just makes it much easier to listen to when you're not hearing the same loop, 1 bar loop over and over. So that's my hot tip. Don't do 1 bar loops if you can avoid it. In saying that, my bass line is pretty boring and I probably should have come up with something a bit more interesting, but I think for this track it worked well because it let the lead line here shine, because this lead line is a bit crazy, as you can hear. So I left a lot of room for this to shine, because when you have complicated rhythmic melodies, you don't want to have a bass line that's also complicated and rhythmic because things get very confusing. So even though the bass line is a bit basic, pun, there is kind of a good reason for that. And that's because this is very quick. These are all semiquavers or 16th notes. And yeah, the rhythm is a little bit complicated, as you can see. And basically with this melody, it's kind of following the chord pretty much, but there's also some passing notes in here. Because the first chord, as I said before, was C minor. So we have a C and an E flat, which are part of the C minor chord. We also have a D and an F, which are not part of the chord. And these ones are just like passing notes, which add some cool flavor to the sound. But they are also part of chords that are to come. So these are part of the B flat major chord, which is coming up at the end of the loop. So that's something you can think about, not just having the notes of the chord in your lead sounds, having notes of different chords in the progression as well. I actually doubled up the lead sound, so we have 2 different instances. And one is up the octave here, so we have C4 and the other one was C3. So this one is higher. And basically I balance the 2 of them. So I start off with a bit low, and then as I bring it up, as we're moving into this transition here, I'm bringing up the sound of that higher octave. Now you may have noticed there in that transition there was a delay added onto this. I've grouped these 2 synths together and called the group synth. And then I've sent the signal of the group to send B here at this point. So you can see that it's rising up just before this new section, and that's to provide the transition. And you can just listen to that if I just solo. And then as I move into the new section, I'm taking that send back down to 0. And it's quite a fun way to, you know, make a transition, add some delay, add some reverb as well. That's my other send. So as you can see here, that is the reverb send. So yeah, I think that's a cool way to transition. And at this point, we have another breakdown. So once again, I've changed the kick pattern because I think it's important to change the kick pattern and not just get stuck in that 4 to the floor groove, which I think a lot of techno artists do. So this one is a little bit syncopated, which means it's a little bit off the beat and it's a little bit swung. And it does differ, like when you're listening to it on the dance floor, you would dance in a different way to the previous kick at the start of the track, which is definitely the intention. And so I paired that up with a loop from Splice. Don't be afraid to use loops. I always use loops. When I first started, I was so against it because I felt like it was like not authentic because I didn't make it myself. But you know, if it's royalty free, I say go for it. And then, you know, you're putting it into your own track anyway. So you're taking ownership by making like every other element. So you might have a different opinion, that's okay, but that's what I think. So that's the loop from Splice. And I've also added some other percussion elements here. Yeah, so I really like how this gives it like a drum break kind of feel. And I also thought I'd show you that the synth melody has changed. And I think it is important to have like an A and a B for a lot of things. So with my melody here, I've gone A towards the start of the track. Then during this middle section, it's like the B melody, and then it comes back to the A melody at the end. And some people that have heard this track thought I held on to the B melody a little bit too long. Maybe they're right, but I felt like I was just prolonging the tension before I went back to the A melody. So this is what the B melody sounds like. So that's part of the breakdown, and I actually decided that I wanted to keep that melody going and make a drop out of it. So that's what this sounds like here. It's a while since I made this track, but I'm pretty sure that this melody is actually the same as the first melody, except like the timing is twice as long. So Ableton has this cool feature when you select all your notes in your melody, you can either divide the rhythm by half or times it by 2. So if I divide this melody in half, I think it may be the same as the first melody. Okay, so it's not exactly the same, but it's got some similar elements, and I may have just moved some of the notes around. But the idea is it's twice, the notes are like twice as long as the first melody. So it's less frantic and it's more of a slower melody as a contrast. So if you ever want to create contrast, using those divide and times under the note section can be quite helpful. And then you can fiddle around because it doesn't always come up with something melodic the first time. You can also try reversing. So if I reverse this, it flips the notes from front to start. So anything that's at the start is now at the end, and anything that was at the end is now at the start. So it's like a mirror image. And then the same thing can be done with this inverse button. And instead of going from front to back, it flips it from top to bottom. And this is just a really fun way to create some accidental melodies, because not everyone can come up with a melody off their head. Or perhaps you can come up with an A melody, but you can't come up with a B melody. It can be hard to find a melody that's similar to an A melody but different. That's something that I've always struggled with. I'll make a couple of melodies and I say, hey, you know, these melodies that are in my track, they actually don't really go together. It's like I have 2 different tracks in my one track. But I find that something like this, these techniques can be really helpful to find a new melody that's different from the A melody, but it's different enough to be interesting as a B melody. It's something you do have to tweak. And so here I've brought in the original melody again. So this is the A melody that I'm talking about. And there's just a little bit of a transition to soften the entry. So it comes in nice and softly, which I think is important. You don't want to jar everyone with the sudden re-entry of your A melody. So I used a auto filter, and you can see that I brought the frequency down quite a bit and then opened it up as we come up to the drop. And there's also a lot of other things that I've been doing throughout with these synths to make them more interesting. I've been using chorus and reverb and delay. So let's look at my chorus automation. So around here, at the start of this cut time section, which is like the B melody, I boosted up the chorus in the lead up and in the start of it. And yeah, I also added that delay on the channel as well as the send. The reverb is pretty much the same on the track throughout, except at the very end of the track, what I like to do a lot of the time is add a big throw of reverb to finish. Let's have a listen to how the track ends. Okay, so it can be really hard to figure out how to end a track. And in this one, I decided to take the melody out, 8 bars before the end, and then just let the bass line carry it through. There's actually no pad there at the end. There's just the kick, the bass line, and some percussion. So just pulling out elements as you're coming towards the end. And I decided to have a delay and reverb throw at the end of this synth line just to help it sort of blend into nothingness so it doesn't just stop immediately. I think in this case it was important to have a tail on the synth so it didn't just abruptly stop. And you can do that by using reverbs and delays. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to make rave techno. There's going to be heaps more coming your way, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. Till next time, bye!